Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and here with Bruce Fein and Ryan Christian. Unfortunately, Dennis had an emergency this morning, but he expects to be back next week. We miss him, and we hope everything is okay. Think there's a lot to talk about today. I'm just going to give a very brief opening and then turn it over to Bruce. Uh, I really don't like to engage in hyperbole. I don't like to exacerbate situation where we really need to figure out how we de-escalate as a country, not make exacerbation. Um, but we have a level of hyper partisanship right now where it's just tit for tat, and I'm worried. Uh, in game theory, you talk about like a prisoner's dilemma. The optimal outcome is when people cooperate. Once we move away from cooperation, there are less optimal outcomes than the outcome of people cooperating. And then you have something called like a dollar auction where and people begin to auction off and the winner has to gets the dollar and the loser has to pay the second highest bid has to then pay the amount that they that the last bid they had made out. And so what you basically have is you have a game that where people basically escalate to a point. They escalate to a point from the outside looks irrational, but from the inside is very rational. That people end up paying $10 for a dollar, and they bid to avoid having a lower loss. So what I'm concerned about is we're escalating, to a point where I think it's I don't really like to use the term perilous just as a way of exaggerating circumstances, but I consider today very perilous times. Um, and I'll just say one more thing about this and turn it over to Bruce. In the past, normally members of Congress wanted to avoid a shutdown, uh, because they wanted to come to an agreement, and they didn't want to cede control over the budget to the executive branch. Now you basically, if at least if you can read, if you take these statements at face value, that Johnson and Trump are relishing a breakdown, a government shutdown. In that way, all spending would be under Trump's control. So if maybe the Republicans might have a different attitude if Biden was in the White House, but in the past, usually they've tried to figure out how to have a solution because they haven't liked the cost of a stalemate and given that discretion to the president. I think the difference in today is the Republican Party seems to relish the opportunity of turning the budget over to the executive branch, as if they haven't already turned over enough to the executive branch. They want to turn over even more to the executive branch. And so I really think we live in very perilous times. Bruce?
Yeah, well, that's surely true, Jeffrey, and I agree with you that we need to get on, adult conversation. That to have a disagreement of an opinion and a viewpoint is not a disrespect of the person and the values and the system. Uh, and we have our leaders unable to recognize that fact. It's all maneuver for power and money, celebrity, whatever it is, on both sides of the aisle. Trump takes it to a new level because, it's difficult to find someone more narcissistic or egotistical to him. Maybe Elon Musk, but they're in the same league. But the others are also, egotistical. What's in it for me? What's in it for the party? Everything is a maneuver to stay in power, and nothing. Well, what's in it for the country? Um, and it's gotten so that you have to disbelieve virtually everything said out of a politician's mouth. It's either affirmatively incorrect or it's stated in a context by omission that's misleading. Now, I think we may have had this conversation before, Ryan and Jeffrey. These are the kinds of statements, if they were made in conjunction with selling a security, would be prosecuted by the Security and Exchange Commission for fraud, without a doubt. And these are the parlance of our politicians. You can't believe any of it. You have to do all of your own homework and background. And they live in their own fantasy land. and we are suffering and going to suffer continually. It's just a matter of maybe at one time, persons of certain viewpoints suffer more than others. But there's no doubt that we have an incredibly partisan and mean-spirited political system that's driving the country to ruination, financially, and compromising our liberty. No due process. We go wars at the drop of a hat. There's no international law. There are no restraints on killing anybody you feel like killing and then calling them a terrorist. And it's a matter of time. They're coming for us, all of us on this program and all the viewers and audience. It's a matter of time when we get into the crosshairs, unless we bow down and genuflect to a king. I'm not going to do that. I hope nobody on this program is going to do that. But that's what's going to happen. It may not happen tomorrow, but that is clearly where the direction of the country is going. And I want to underscore for the umpteenth time, at present, the president for decades has claimed the power and utilized it to play prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner to kill any person he decides he wants to label an imminent threat to national security, whatever that is. Even if there's been restraint in using that godlike power, we don't know it because all the exercises of the power are secret and classified. So we don't know how often it's used. We know at least on one occasion from Leak that Anwar al-Awlaki's teenage son was exterminated while he's having dinner in Yemen. But we don't know how many other times that has been duplicated. But we fought a revolution.
Where was he killed? Where he was killed in Yemen, right?
Yes, he was killed in Yemen.
In Yemen, did he represent an imminent direct threat to the United States from Yemen?
He was having dinner at the time with a friend.
American citizen, yeah.
American, and he was American citizen.
Yes, because American. So does that qualify as being an imminent direct threat to the country?
Yeah, of course not. It's ridiculous. But that's, but the argument is made, well, the president says it can't be reviewed. You have to accept it as gospel. I say, even if he said that we have the geocentric theory of the universe, we have to start our astronomy classes teaching the geocentric theory.
I remember his assassination, extermination, assassination. So illegal murder, in my opinion. I'm curious. What was the Republican response? Because this was done by Obama. So
before we get into the deeper topic, can I make some opening statements real quick?
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
So, I think what's important to think about is something that Bruce often points out, and it's a classic. A republic if you can keep it, right? Like it's up to us to maintain this, and I think that's what this looks like. I think what we're seeing now is something we always should have been doing, and I think what the reason this is happening today is because Americans have been convinced or otherwise allowed politicians to run rampant without us or anything else checking them. And I think that, my opinion, my tagline for my show, we always should have been questioning everything anybody says. Most importantly, people we support. If they're genuine, we should more than anybody hold their feet to the fire. I think they would expect that if they were genuine. And I think right now we're realizing that we always should have been doing that and not taking a partisan choice to be like, I trust this person because he probably has good intentions. I think 2016 forward, we really saw that turn, like what you were talking about. It became not just we disagree politically, but you're the enemy, right? You were destroying the country. And that was a very, very dangerous turn. And it was both sides that played that game. So on the shutting down part of it, I think it's important. This may be something that I think maybe Jeffrey would agree with me, but I think many people would disagree that I'm more of the mind that we should maybe just let it shut down. If we're in a situation, and I know there's consequences, I know that there are people that are dependent and so on, but I think the larger problem is being stuck in a position where they play this game. And I think the problem is that both sides play into this like you were talking about. They both point at each other, and it becomes a game of compliance and allowance, and really most of it ends up not being in the interest of the American people. And so I think we should, shuck this off, the reliance on this. But I know that's more of a radical point. I just really want to stress the idea that regardless, we should be questioning these people, all of them. Regardless of, they could be misled. They could be lied by somebody else. So just question them, right? Can't allow them to run rampant.
Yeah. I mean, those are wonderful comments, Ryan. I just make the observation, however, that given the existing law, if there's a shutdown, the president unilaterally decides who is an essential employee. Essential.
Yeah, that's a good point.
The people who are prosecuting Jim Comey are essential, but nobody else is. The system is going to shut down. So I agree. I think that there is, however, some good of a shutdown, because I think it shows at least a substantial part of government activities are irrelevant and useless.
Right.
People wouldn't even know if the Department of Education got shut down, or the Department of Energy. No one would really understand why. My view is all the intelligence community can shut down. It's they do nothing useful other than tell lies. Why do we need you? But again, it has these offsetting ideas because Congress is giving away the power of the purse. The power of the purse was the way in which the Parliament contained kings in Great Britain, and that was the power giving to Congress. It was the so-called trump card, not to put too fine a point on it, that gave the legislative branch an ability to control the executive. If you don't have any money to do anything, and Congress had reinforced that power by making it illegal to accept voluntary services, that's the Anti-Deficiency Act, you got to get money from us before you can do anything. That was the ability to have Congress get some leverage over the executive. They've given that away. They don't enforce anything. And I reinforce, and again, to go on again with regard to the limitless power that Congress has crowned the president with. We're having today discussions about how TikTok is going to be spun off to billionaires. TikTok is illegal. It's been illegal since January 19th, and yet Congress acquiesces in the president saying, so what? I'm not going to enforce the law. The Attorney General, Pam Bondi, saying, you know what? I'm not enforcing the law. You can continue to service TikTok. You don't have to worry about any penalties. And there's no limiting principle. Why can't they do that to every single law in the U.S. Code?
Again, we live in despotism. Yeah. The law is what Trump says the law is, okay? And the reality is, in my opinion, that I'm not saying everyone who voted for Trump feels this way, but everyone who identifies themselves with the MAGA movement, so many of them who say we want Trump to have a third term, even that Lindsey Graham wore the hat, Trump in 2028, and he says he knows it's against the Constitution, but would like Trump to have a third term. The reality is most of them don't seem to have any concern for what is constitutional, not constitutional. They think Trump is saving the country. Given the fact that they think Trump is saving the country, they're happy giving Trump all the power he wants. And they think anything that impedes that power impedes in Trump's effort to save the country. So they think the greater good is not the Constitution, but saving the country from their perspective. Okay, from their perspective. And so they're happy giving Trump everything he wants. So because he's their savior. So the Constitution doesn't apply. If somebody's a president, the Constitution applies. But if somebody's a savior, then the Constitution doesn't apply, because the savior, going back to use that word, the savior trumps the president. So Trump is a savior, as perceived by most of the MAGA people, it seems, and therefore, they don't care about any of these issues. They only care about anything that gets in the way of him doing what he's doing, which they all think is on their behalf. So, and anything that gets in that way is an act of treason. So that seems to be, so there doesn't seem to be really, this is not really an issue of rule of law. They were confident, they were comfortable. We hear the stuff, rule of law. I don't like to bring this up very much because I'm not someone who likes to take cheap shots. So Trump is the president. I'm not disputing him as a legitimate president. He won the election. So he might be a president, in my opinion, who should be impeached. But he's not impeached yet. Probably will not get impeached. So I'm not challenging his. But the reality is, all these people who say I want everyone, they broke the law, they should suffer the consequences. Okay, we have the president who is a convicted felon. They were very happy about Trump not suffering any consequences associated from the crime he was convicted of. So, because they don't even really believe in the justice system unless it produces the outcome that they want. So the only thing that's legitimate is anything that produces the outcome they want. They don't believe in process at all. Okay, they have no interest in process at all. The process is only legitimate to the extent the process produces the result that they want, and any process that doesn't produce the result they want is an illegitimate process. Okay, and this is practiced by both parties. One a little more to extreme to the other, so I don't want to accuse that of. But what we're seeing now is something that, especially in peacetime, I think we're not. Well, we're not at peace, right? We're at war with Portland. So we declared war against Portland. Well, Trump declared war against Portland.
Well, the Venezuela too, Jeffrey, and then we're at war with all. Yeah, every criminal.
And I want to make one comment about one of the, and then I'll turn back to you regarding what Ryan's comment about the shutdown, and my opinion about the shutdown. If we had a president, okay, who said, "Gee, you know what? I relish the opportunity of showing that government could be much more limited without any consequence. So I love the shutdown because now I'm going to be able to show the American people we can run a much smaller government." I would celebrate the shutdown. Okay.
Talk about saving money, right?
Ryan, do you really believe that's the condition? Do you really think that what Trump wants to accomplish in the shutdown is to say, let me demonstrate to the American public that we can run the government at a significantly lower cost? Do you believe that's his objective?
No, I think both sides of the paradigm actively want to maintain. I think they want to use the threat of the possible shutdown to push in more government control. That happens every time, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure.
So this is my concern. If a shutdown with somebody, we did have some shutdowns with during the Reagan's years, and Reagan was somebody who wanted to get government spending under control, and he was sincere about getting government spending under control. So he wanted to try and rein in, and he had to face a Democratic majority all his 8 years. So, and he was able to contain spending. With a Democratic Congress, with a big spending Congress, he was able to rein in spending, I think successfully, given the fact that he didn't have his own party ever had control of any of the branches of government. But so in that period of time, you had a president who had an objective that was a philosophical objective of, I believe in limited government. And to the extent that I have an opportunity of, having a government shutdown and show that we can do more with less, okay, that's what Reagan wanted to show. Who believes that's what Trump wants to show? You believe it, Bruce?
No, of course not. And I want to take this opportunity, to argue why, although it's not necessarily dispositive of everything, why we have to be very, very chary about expanding government. Because we see with Trump more glaring than, but although it was true with Biden to a lesser extent, but it was there anyway. The more the government grows, the more it will wield its power to manipulate the conversation. They will go after and use the discretion it has to favor those whose viewpoints it liked for that time and place, and drop nuclear bombs on people who have dissident viewpoints. And it's very, very dangerous to accept money or have the government have any control over the financial fate of yourself or your business. Because given what we know about the attitude, the ulterior motives of politicians, it's just a matter of time. They're going to come back and use that against you. That's what politics is. It's not based on economics. It's aiding friends and trying to destroy enemies. Maybe it wasn't all that way in 1787, but that's what it is today. And that's why any increment of power, even if you think, you hope that it will be used for some benevolent purpose, it's going to come back and haunt you. That's why look at all these universities taking all this money from. Don't do it. Go ahead. I apologize. Go ahead, Jeff.
The comment you make, I want to be more emphatic about. But I'm going to give a preference first. My profession, I'm an investor, professional speculator. Okay, my approach to investing has always been, before I invest in something, I don't look at how much money I could make. I figure out what the downside is, and I put a lot of effort into understanding the downside. Once I feel I can live with the downside, then the question is, am I rewarded enough on the potential upside so my expected return is satisfactory to me? But I don't look at something when someone says, I can get you 10x, okay, and say, oh, gee, I want to make 10x, let me put my money into it. No, first I start thinking about everything I think that can go wrong. Doesn't mean I'm always successful at doing that. It means that's what I always try and focus in, is I do risk management. I think these are all the things that I think could go wrong. What do I think the probability is that thing go wrong? Can I live with it if it goes wrong? How much then capital can I deploy? And then am I getting enough? Am I getting enough compensation and upside? Expected upside. To take that type of risk. But I always think about the downside first. I always like to think about what are all the things that can go wrong. So if I look at the circumstances, today, and let's go back to down a TikTok issue and government control. Here we have a situation with TikTok, and in a second I will ask Ryan if we can play that, or I have to maybe play the clip. I don't know. Figure it out. Who is controlling TikTok? It seems like it's Larry Ellison. Who will have not a role in the cap table, but a role in the governance of it? Someone from the government will be supposed to be on the board. Okay, so we're going to have government in the governance of basically the largest social media app out there. Okay, so you're talking about, so is it really now going to be an arm of the government? Well, there might be an indication, because a guy named Bibi Netanyahu, which I circulated that article, made announcements that said, I'm so excited about this new ownership because now I can get my message out. So basically saying is that TikTok will help propagandize the propaganda of Bibi and Israel. So they're just advertising it's going to be a propaganda machine. Okay, and who knows what they're going to do, with the algorithm they get a control over. But we do know that whatever decisions they make, someone from the Trump administration will be in the room. Okay, so how likely do you think it'll be that they'll make decisions that the people in the Trump administration will not like? Okay, this is government. This is now a government-controlled app. I don't care. All you need for the government to control it is one person in the room. That's all you need. One person in the room. Okay, they're not going to do anything to put something at risk to that one person in the room. They don't need to control the board. They control it with just one person. Okay, de facto, maybe not de jure, but de facto, that's the case. So that's my opinion, because I like to think about all the things that go wrong in the downside. Is what's the likelihood all those people who might be allies of the administration, when the person who Trump designates to be on the board of TikTok says, I'm not happy, let me take a look at the algorithm. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to tell them, get the hell out of the room, we're outvoting you? Who believes that?
Yeah, but Jeffrey and Ryan, this is not the first time we've seen a rodeo. This is exactly what happened with Nippon Steel and U.S. Steel. They stuck a board member, a U.S. government board member on that as well. And that's probably what's going to happen with Intel with regard to the government in investment on that score. And it's very interesting that Netanyahu is the one that figured now he can use TikTok to get his views out, because this is the untold story about the TikTok legislation. The real motivation wasn't China. The real motivation was because TikTok was the platform that was most critical of Netanyahu and Gaza and the West Bank. That was what was really going on here. All the stuff about China invading privacy, it was just a smokescreen. They didn't like the fact that TikTok was a platform that was being utilized more than other platforms to criticize Israel. I mean, again, it just shows all these Machiavellian, what I consider un-American motivations behind all of this, which is why we need to stand firm, absent overwhelming evidence, against all this government growth and activity. It's not because the world will otherwise be perfect. It's not. Humans are made of crooked timber. But given the alternatives, the abuses of government, the cure of the government remedy is always worse than the disease, with rare exceptions. So you got to live with the disease if you can't make it better.
I think there was a second objective. I think the TikTok algorithm has been the most successful manipulative algorithm, of any platform. Facebook, Google, whatever, have not created an algorithm that has been as addictive to people as TikTok has been. And I think they wanted to get the algorithm. So the government wanted to get the algorithm. The government wanted to say, gee, this is better than anything. We can subpoena anything we want from all these other platforms. We can't subpoena, because that's what the Chinese government said. The Chinese government said, nobody has access to the algorithm unless you go to Mr. Xi. So the only way, so I think they wanted, since the government is about influence, okay, controlling data and having influence, okay, Yeah, and I agree with you, because from my understanding, that TikTok USA has had their data on Oracle servers in the US. So it seems to me, if there's any backdoors into those servers or any request from information from China it's going, it seems Oracle would know. So it seems to me that the ability to carve out and take the data and isolate it, in a way that that the Chinese, party could not get access to it. It seems to me that could have been negotiated if that was the concern. So I agree with you that this was that this was not really going back to the securities offering. The statement to the public was probably a fraudulent statement on what they wanted to accomplish with this. They just didn't like the fact that the most influential act out there, was controlled by, that there was something that had influence in the U.S. that the government didn't control. Okay, so that's the bottom line, and both parties agree to it. If anyone's going to influence the American people, Democrats and Republicans agree on one thing: the only people we want influencing the American people are us. Okay, not third parties. We want to have a monopoly on the propaganda. We don't want any we don't want competition for who gets to propagandize, the American public.
Yeah, but Jeffrey, that takes it. Let me interject, apologize, and then take over on. And Jeffrey, that's in spades what Pete Hegseth told the newspapers. You can't publish anything about Defense Department unless we approve it. I mean, this really, how's that any different than Putin and Xi? Really? You can't, why is it? Because the Defense Department never tells lies? I mean, it was open and notorious. If you do not permit us to pre-clear everything you print, you cannot get access to the Defense Department and Pentagon. Total unvarnished statement of attempting to make the newspapers into a propaganda arm of the Pentagon. And I remember years ago, maybe you do, Jeffrey, the selling of the Pentagon. It was a big 60 Minutes expose. This takes selling the Pentagon to a new level.
I was just going to add that let's not forget that, I mean, ByteDance, there was already an Israeli investment behind the scenes. And what this ultimately looks like is the consolidation of Israeli control of this platform. And I think both sides of the paradigm, it's not so much about U.S. Well, I think the interest align, let's put it that way. And this is largely about the control of that conversation. And we can point out that before this even technically took place, before Larry Ellison and Oracle even actually controlled the platform, they were already massively censoring the conversation of the sale, and the spike in censoring around the Israel conversation went exponentially through the roof. So very important to see. Now, before we play that other clip, Jeffrey, I wanted to include this one of Greenblatt from before this point saying it was leaked that they have a TikTok problem and it's a generational problem. I think that's very relevant. It's the fun all the way to the right. It shows you that this was something that was already clearly established by Israel and the ADL.
Okay, I'm adding it right now.
But I also want to point out that we have a major generational problem. All the polling I've seen, ADL's polling, ICC's polling, independent polling, suggests this is not a left-right gap, folks. The issue in the United States in support for Israel is not left and right. It is young and old. And the numbers of young people who think that Hamas's, massacre was justified is shockingly and terrifyingly high. And so we really have a TikTok problem, a Gen Z problem, that our community needs to put the same brains that gave us Taglit, the same brains that gave us all these other amazing innovations, need to put our energy toward this, fast. Because again, we've been chasing this left-right divide. It's the wrong game. The real game is the next generation, and the Hamas and their accomplices, the useful idiots in the West, are falling in line in ways that are terrifying. Last thing I'll just say, we saw a dramatic change in the language of the activists here in America on October the 8th. The language of groups that we've long tracked, who've long been problematic, like Students for Justice in Palestine and Jewish Voices for Peace.
What that shows you is the ADL has literal people inside these groups that are spying on them. I just think that's insane, by the way. And the overarching points about their opinion about people and supporting Hamas is, I think there's a very big nuance about people waving a Palestinian flag. But the point was that was, by the way, verified, has already been covered by lots of Israeli platforms. That was a leaked discussion from the ADL telling you that that was a problem and they had to get a handle on it. Now, and here, I'll bring you the other video for you, Jeffrey. Now we have this happening. I just don't think you can decouple these 2 points, obviously. I think it's very relevant. And Larry Ellison is an ardent, outspoken supporter of Israel.
Okay, but yeah, before I put up the Larry Ellison one, I want to make the other comment, give in reinforce your point. If you think about now, also, if you take a look at the, as I read some of the articles, because I like to read articles from all different sides, because I want to understand everybody.
Right.
So, so I'll read the New York Times, and I'll read Gateway Pundit, and I'll read Breitbart, and I'll read the Washington Post. So I try and read everything because I want to understand. I read the Libertarian Institute, I read Mises. So I try and read, people from diverse points of view, because I want to understand where they're coming from. So you can't dialogue with people if you don't make an effort to understand them. So if you take a look at now, like in Gateway Pundit, I read an article about the look into the investigation of Soros and the type of groups Soros is funding, and that they're describing them as domestic terrorist groups. They're mostly groups that have been supporting Palestine liberation. So, and it's almost like they're talking of any group that supports Palestinian self-governance, same self-rule in a Palestinian state is by definition a terrorist organization. They seem to be equating the two as being one and the same. So going back to your comment, Ryan, it's all kind of defund any of this effort, to either to really lock down, to make sure that these other groups just can't get funding. And the descriptions, as we just keep broadening, the term of domestic terrorist and a city being war savaged and stuff like that. This rhetoric is just is horrible. Let me add Larry Ellison to the stage now, and we can have Larry Ellison speak for himself, and Larry Ellison describe his vision of America as Larry Ellison is building the data centers that are going to house a lot of the growth of AI. Okay, he's building the data centers to house, AI, and this is the guy that also will be, the controlling party. I guess a partner in control with the government. Since again, I already believe that once the government had a seat in it, that means that seat is a controlling seat. So let me add Larry Ellison to the stage.
Your body cams will be transmitting that. The police will be on their best behavior, because we're constantly watching and recording everything that's going on. Citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on.
When you come to government and what government's doing, there are artificial intelligence tools, and some of them I know that Oracle have developed around financial management for government. But also, tell us a bit about because you're right at the forefront of this revolution, what it means for what government should do in terms of its digital infrastructure, digital ID, data centers, and so on.
How do you take advantage of these incredible AI models? And the first thing a country needs to do is to unify all of their data so it can be consumed and used by the AI model.
Which they did.
You have to take all of your healthcare data, your diagnostic data, your electronic health records, your genomic data. And in the Middle East, in the UAE, for example, they're incredibly rich in data. They have a lot of population data. The NHS in the UK has an incredible amount of population data, but it's fragmented. It's not easily accessible by these AI models. We have to take all of this data we have in our country and move it into a single, if you will, unified data platform. So we provide context. When we want to ask a question, we've provided that AI model with all the data they need to understand our country. So that's the big step. That's kind of the missing link. We need to unify all of the national data, put it into a database where it's easily consumable by the AI model, and then ask whatever question you like.
So you're really, through the use of this, you're revolutionizing the way government works, right? The services it provides, the way that it operates. What about things like financial management, procurement? How can AI help a government operate more efficiently, more effectively, give a more direct and better service to the citizen?
Well, we have these modern financial systems. So, countries can, and all, so for example, the AI system will help you do that. But again, the secret is to get all of that data in one place. Without having the basic data, it cannot answer the question about your country. I think countries are very uncomfortable with keeping their data in other countries' data centers. So I think part of our essential infrastructure, just like airports obviously need to be in our country, or they're not terribly useful. Ports need to be in our country, and they're not terribly useful. Data centers, because of the privacy requirements around the data, need to be in our countries, or they're not terribly useful. They need to be in our countries, but they also need to be secure. And there are new technologies right now. This is the last year you will ever log on to an Oracle system with a password. Next, by the middle of this year, I'm quite certain you are Tony Blair. So how do I know? Well, I look at you, I hear your voice, I listen to the kind of questions you ask. I'm pretty sure you're not synthetically created in having this conversation. The security system, we have biometric logins. The computer recognizes you. It recognizes your voice. It might ask you to put your index finger on the return key. And we're absolutely certain it's you. There's no reason to enter a password. In fact, passwords are too easily stolen. Data centers and data is being taken hostage all over the world. The ransomware business is a very, very good business. It's getting bigger and better every year. We tend not to talk about it because the American FBI has a simple advice to someone whose data has been ransomed. Just pay them because there's nothing we can do about it. But there is something we can do about it, not after the data is stolen, but before the data is stolen. We can make sure that we're using the latest security technology, and it is going to be biometrics assisted by AI to make sure that you are in fact Tony Blair, and I'm sure you are.
Now, the interesting thing I want to talk about the biometrics. Okay, right now, as you know, life is a series of trade-offs. Okay, right now, is you put your user ID and you put a password in, and you can create your own private environment. Okay, once you put your biometrics up there, they're tracking everything. Right. So that the idea of using these ways of validating who you are is to prevent you from ever creating your own private environment. That's the goal, is to completely erase privacy.
And you can be locked out of the current system should they decide that based on the wrong speech, the wrong political beliefs. That's where that goes to.
They control your access now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And biometrics, they control your access, and you can't create your own private space. If you think you can use your fingerprints and your facial recognition and think that once you do that, because it seems easier to you, and a little harder to steal, that basically now you have your own private space. No, they're recognizing you every time you look, every time you point the finger. Okay, once you go in, put your password in. They don't know what your password is. Okay, and that's your private identification, so you could create your own private space. Now you're making everything public information. And when he says we, who are we? Has he defined who we are? Who's that group of privileged people who are going to have access to everything? Okay, right. Who's that we? Who's the we that decide what algorithm, okay? Who decides what algorithm governs us, and who the people who have access to all this information, which are the private parties? That's why people are building data centers and building AI and going to the meeting to the White House where they can all come and form their cartel. If you see these meetings, I mean, it's a little more transparent in the past, but these people getting together and having these conversations, you know what they remind me of? Jekyll Island. You know, the
Right.
bankers that snuck off to Jekyll Island.
Fed, yeah.
Fed.
Did you notice the name of the conference, guys? It's the World Government Conference. That's
No,
what it is.
But I want to interject here because this is really dystopia.
Yeah.
Number one, he talks about centralizing all the information. We know where that information is going to end up, in the hands of the government, for sure, directly or indirectly.
This
right?
already happened in the United States.
We already know, we already had a good use of centralized information. It happened in World War II. The way we got the addresses of all the loyal Japanese Americans that we wanted to herd into concentration camps, 120,000, we got them from the census. It wasn't as centralized as it is today, but we know what they're using this for. We had huge lists of everybody that was going to be arrested in the event of a national emergency prepared by J. Edgar Hoover. Right. You don't think that's going to happen again? It for certain, maybe it'll be classified so we won't know about it. That's for sure going to happen. With all that information, I mean, this administration, you criticize Israel, wow, you're on that list. They're going to come arrest you as soon as there's anything that they proclaim is another emergency, which means they don't get their way because there's no limitation on what an emergency is anymore.
Are you talking about the continuity of government overlap?
Yeah. I mean, we and moreover, this goes back again, Ryan and Jeffrey, to the reason why philosophically I'm opposed to any but the smallest government. When you get the business and the private sector involved in government, and when they have financial dependency, they will turn over everything. When AT&T after 9/11 had all these huge contracts with the Defense Department and the Attorney General, the FBI, CIA, can we come and intercept without warrants and look at all of your traffic? They said yes, without even any legal authority whatsoever. Why did AT&T do that? They basically handed over, the snooping function to the government without any court order because they wanted the contracts. It's as simple as that. Now, sometimes it's more overt, sometimes it's covert. That's why, in my judgment, why there's been resistance, to push back on these universities, that it's clearly they're being targeted by Trump because of their viewpoints, not for anything else. It's because they got the money. Hey, you got it. We have to be smart enough. Keep government small. I go back and I repeat again, it's not because it means we'll have paradise, but as soon as you get the government involved, that's the beginning of the end of your liberty.
Yeah,
over and over again, you got to keep it small because the cure is way worse than the disease. And we go back to Justice Brandeis. Among civilized people, the right to be let alone is the most cherished right among all. The right to be let alone, it gives you a sense of robustness, of independence. Just get away from me. I don't have to do anything. That's why you have a right to tell a policeman if he doesn't have a warrant, I don't have to talk to you. That kind of individual independence, the absence of docility, it's important to keep our liberties. You have to have that spirit. And that spirit disappears as soon as everybody believes they all got a dossier and you threw a mud ball at a little child in the sandbox at age 5, and then they'll distort it and make it look like you're a child molester. People are naturally timid and they're going to be quiet, and the government will steamroller them.
I read an article, Bruce and Ryan, over the weekend where it was talking about the trade negotiations with South Korea and some of the holdup, and supposedly that deal is being retraded to some extent. And one of the important points is that this $350 billion, that $1 billion check that supposedly South Korea is supposed to write to the U.S. For its investment in the U.S., which I read apparently now they want 550. That's part of the retrading, was to raise the number from 350 to 550. It's not for South Korea to have discretion over the use of the money. That's money supposed to go into some sort of entity that Trump will control. So just think, he's not really trying to create a sovereign wealth fund, okay? Because it's not like a fund that the Congress will be involved in. This is money that's going to go to the executive branch. So this is basically the executive branch taking over and being, an important, maybe the most important allocator of capital in the country by going to all these countries and saying, if you want low tariff rates, this is the way to get low. You're going to get a tariff rate either way. But if you want a lower tariff rate, you got to write a check to the White House that I'm going to have discretion over. Maybe I'll have Scott Bessent and a few other people sit in the room, and and Lutnick, and we'll get around. And what will we have? We'll have everybody knocking on our door, begging us for allocating capital. People will know that the only route to getting money, okay, through us is, what are you going to do for me? Okay. So this is what people. This is not a capitalist society. What's the difference between Soviet Russia and Stalin and what Trump wants?
Yeah.
Have everybody's data, okay, and centralize the capital allocation process. What's the difference? We're talking about, we want to defeat communism. We're moving towards communism.
All right.
Okay.
And they criticize the Clinton Foundation and Clintons for all kinds of stuff like that.
Allocator of capital be the president.
Yeah. And notice also that the countries we get close to, they got the sovereign wealth funds. These are not countries that have free market, economies whatsoever. They're all controlled economies too. That's why repeatedly on my X account, I say this is Bolshevism. Why is so? Who is going to stand up and explain? This is imitation of the so-called communist enemy. We don't put that label on it, but that's exactly what it is. Communism, they control the economy, they control your financial fate. So if you don't echo their viewpoints, you get yanked. As simple as that. It has nothing to do with economics.
Yeah, I want to reiterate this to the MAGA world, okay? When you sit back and say you want to centralize the responsibility of allocating capital to the president, any president, okay, you're a communist.
Yeah, you are.
You want the government to control the allocation of capital, okay? So you're destroying capitalism, okay? You're a communist, okay?
But as we've all pointed out,
if you want the marketplace to allocate capital, you're a capitalist. If you want the president to allocate capital, you're a communist, okay? Clear?
But again, remember, like you add in the fascist part of it, it becomes a much more interesting point. Like I think the point is that these people are hypocrites. Like I don't think we could argue every one of them are that in that fine category. I think it's kind of a blend of just hypocrisy, right? Whether it's it's basically government control of our lives, and it's okay if their guy doesn't. And it just continues to cascade in that direction.
I got to interject here. I got to interject some humor. This goes back when Leonid Brezhnev was then the chairman of the Soviet Union. And he's engaged in a conversation at that time with the president of France. And he's saying that he's disputing that there's any difference between communism and capitalism. He says, they're polar opposites. And he says, really? Explain that. So Brezhnev says, well, capitalism is the exploitation of man by man. And then he says, communism, it's the opposite. Right. And that's where we are, right? There isn't any difference other than who's on the short stick and who's on the long stick. That's all it is. Government, limitless power, craving, help your friends, destroy your enemies. They never want to take risk. They never want to have to build a better mousetrap to compete. They only want to be successful only because they got a big stick or got the military to smash you over the head. That's it. I mean, this is a regression to Cro-Magnon man or even earlier. It's really, really quite despicable in my mind. We're so far back, way before 1776. At the time we're supposed to be celebrating the 250th anniversary of our independence. We've gone backwards centuries in terms of our moral and ethical and precepts of what's virtuous and what is not, and how we ought to evaluate other people as human beings. This is perhaps the greatest regression, since the bubonic plague, in the Dark Ages. It's horrible.
Assuming everybody in the general population is in that category. And I don't think that. I think it's a different percentage, but I do agree there's a lot of people trapped in that. But I tend to think that, like I think we talked about before, Donald Trump, again, it comes back to whether or not you think the selection process, elections are really translated to the outcome of your vote actually does. Not to say it's not important, but I don't think that's where we are, is that Donald Trump being in that position is pacifying who would be the most vocal against anybody else doing those things. Same with COVID-19, right? And you could say the same thing with Biden in certain positions for the left, where they would be the ones saying martial law, if it was Obama or Biden doing a fraction of this, but because he's there, they look at it differently. And I think that's how this two-party illusion is played by a government that uses it to manipulate us. And it's much more nuanced than that, but I think that is a large way this government plays us.
Yeah, for sure. But I want to go back that Larry Ellison is really quite frightening, because he understands only one thing. He can make money if he gets all this data collected and do X, Y, Z. He doesn't understand, or he doesn't care. Anytime you have new technology and new information, the government will use it against you. They'll use it to invade your privacy. They'll use it to arrest you. They'll use it to harass you. That is the history of mankind. And it will always, this AI, maybe there has some good things, but we know it will be hijacked by the military industrial complex to lower the threshold to go to war and kill people by automation. It will be horrifying, because it'll remove the sense of individual responsibility that comes from just pressing a button. Well, AI told me to launch XYZ. And I give this example. Paul Tibbet, who he flew the Enola Gay, dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. He couldn't have killed those people if you told him, you can't drop that bomb from 80,000 feet altitude. You got to go down yourself, kill those women and children and civilians. He couldn't do that if you forced him that way. But the technology enabled him, to drop the bomb, even though General Eisenhower, Patrick Leahy said not Patrick Leahy, I forget it, William Leahy, that it was totally unnecessary, and that's not how we should fight wars, that Japan was already ready to surrender.
Right.
But it's inevitable. Even if you go back forever, Leonardo da Vinci, Galileo, they had their brilliance co-opted by the military. They built weapons for tyrants, right? That's what happened. Any technology is going to be used in that way, and we need to try to safeguard against it. And it may well be that the evils from a technology are so great, and that we're unable with any moral ethic to contain them. We just need to close our eyes and say we can't go down that path. We don't trust ourselves with that. Just like we would say we don't trust an AK-47 with a 5-year-old. Say we understand our limitations and we shouldn't go down there. And we seem totally heedless, of that admonition. Go forward. If you can make a buck, fine.
Here's the difference today. The difference today, the additional point, is that I think power structures are very aware of this dynamic. And ultimately, I guess the easy way to say it is today, when they go, here's a new thing that we might want to try, they've already been testing on you using in the military for 20 years. That's pretty common when you look at these things they present to you, when it's really about getting you to accept what they already plan to roll out. And so it's a different thing, right? We're not at a point where we can go, maybe as a society, we should decide this isn't part of it. We're immersed with this when the time it's being discussed. That's a very different way to look at it, right? And I think that's the biggest problem, is how do we go back from this when they've already built the world around you and now wanting you to say it's okay, Yeah.
If you think about going back to the reference you made, Bruce, and then going to like the dropping of the atomic bomb, how much different history might have been if the argument between Szilard and Oppenheimer would have been won by Szilard.
Mm-hmm.
For everybody's edification, how the process started was basically Leo Szilard, a physicist at the University of Chicago. He and Teller and Eugene Wigner, but it was Szilard who instigated it. Had heard that Heisenberg was Werner Heisenberg, who was the most famous German scientist at that point in time, who was still in Germany, was developing an atomic bomb. And part of the reason Hitler was sending troops to Africa was not just looking for artifacts, but looking for materials so that they could build a nuclear weapon. So Heisenberg got so Szilard got very concerned. Szilard went to visit Einstein out in Long Island. He was staying at a house of a friend, and he convinced Einstein to write a letter to Roosevelt, and that kicked off the atomic bomb project. But the concern was they didn't want Hitler to have a monopoly on an atomic bomb. So they began the project. And then when Germany surrendered, because Germany surrendered months before the Japanese surrendered, as soon as the Germans was clear that Germany was defeated, Szilard became a movement inside people in the project, which there was a lot of support for, to stop the project. So they said, what do we need it any for? There is no threat. The world should not have a weapon like this, And so the only purpose was we didn't want Germany and Hitler to be the only one with a nuclear weapon. So that nobody should have a monopoly on nuclear power, neither Germany nor us. That is just a bad idea for the world, to anyone to have a monopoly on nuclear power. And so Szilard said we should just stop the project. And basically, in trying to communicate with people in the teams, that there was a team at Chicago, there was a team out in California, and there was a team in Los Alamos. And most of the theoretical work was done at Chicago. The fact is that they basically shut down Szilard, so there'd be no communication. And Oppenheimer kept pushing people to say, let's keep building this. So we started, let's finish it. For what purpose? Who really knows? And then Szilard then tried to further push, the fact that we should not use it. And there was a lot of push for saying is, maybe the safest thing is to make this technology available to everybody and controlled under one agency. So a global agency, so that nobody would have a monopoly on this power, because the worst thing for world peace is for one party to be able to have a nuclear threat that they could use against everybody else in the world. So, what would the world have looked like today if we would have abandoned the project? At that point in time, we would have abandoned it because we hadn't finished it yet. There were still problems to be solved before we could use it. Who knows if Russia or any other country would have been able to do it, or they would have put all the resources in place to try and get it done. And if they did, we would probably know, and we would have had it well advanced, and we'd be able to get there or catch up quickly as any point in time. So there's really no need to do this except humans and their capacity to build weapons to kill people.
Yeah, but to show also the warping thinking that comes in with the government and Senate, a very strong argument that moved Truman as then Secretary of State Jimmy Burns and said, well, wait a minute, we've already put in $2 billion, as this is 1940s, into this. We'll be criticized if we don't move forward, say you just wasted all that money. And so, and that's the kind of thinking, well, maybe we won't kill, millions of people. The latter concern doesn't enter the equation. But we can't stop now because it'll just say it was a waste. No, the reason, and then they really went forward, not Szilard, but the politicians said, no way, we're not going to give up that project. And it was really to terrify Stalin into complying the Yalta agreements that were supposed to democratize Central and Eastern Europe. He wasn't complying. And so we could frighten him by dropping the bomb on the Japanese. And then I want to add this as well, Jeffrey. This is also that the Japanese, we've always had a very, very jaundiced, biased attitude towards Asians, right? It started with the Chinese Exclusion Act, the coolies. So we could drop the atomic bomb on Japan, but whites, no, we wouldn't probably do that. So there was a racist element in this as well. And the racism goes back, it just began with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. With the Chinese Exclusion Act and the worry about the so-called yellow peril, we had laws on the books up until 1945, when we wanted to get Chiang Kai-shek on our side to fight Mao, that prohibited you from becoming a U.S. citizen. You couldn't be naturalized if you had any Asian heritage. That's how bad it was. There was segregation. Their numbers weren't the same, but there was school segregation too. If you're Asian, you didn't go to the same school as white people. And that's another element into the dropping the bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. A very, very sad commentary on, a species and certainly a country that was built upon the principle that everybody is born with unalienable rights, and you don't forfeit unalienable rights because of your skin color.
And the same thing is happening today with Muslim culture with the overlap of the Middle East, Palestine.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeffrey. You were going to say something.
No. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. No, that was just my point. Just in general, we can see that very same demonization. The thought that jumped into my head though is, and it's probably both. But do you think it was more about using that for political manipulation, or that it was really just driven by racism? Like, it's both, but which way do you think that slanted? Because today, I think, again, it's probably the same question today. I can't tell which one's more prevalent, but I think it's both.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Ryan, difficult issues often have multiple motivations. I think both were prominent, both the racism and, hey, we got to send a message to Stalin. They comply with Yalta, or, look at, we have this huge bomb and we could then drop it on you.
And most of the military leadership that was responsible for executing the war, actually in the battlefield, were against the dropping of the bomb.
Yeah. They said all the Japanese army was in Manchuria. They couldn't get back to the mainland, right? Because we controlled the seas. This idea that if we invaded, there'd be millions of deaths, a total concoction, complete concoction to justify, war crimes, basically, is what it was for foreign policy purposes. Japan was already destroyed.
I just really hope that people are absorbing what Bruce and Jeffrey just said. Like, the reality of this is not debatable. The U.S. government at the time decided to drop the largest bomb we've ever known of, that at this point no one else has ever done, on a group that had already begun to surrender, and already, like, you just need to really think about what that means then. And it is only largely the mentality, the logic, the might makes right sense, only gotten worse to this day. Maybe not with the actions in the sense of nuclear bombs, but the prevalence of that mindset and how it's acted out around the world is why we have the war on terror, why we have these different occupations, as Bruce points out often. It's empire today.
And I do think it made, I think the statement Truman wanted to make against Russia probably was more important to him than the fact that they were Japanese. But I think,
I agree.
I think if they were not Japanese, it would have been a much more difficult decision. So the trade-off would have been, if these were white people, maybe he would have decided, saying is, the message of having an atomic bomb drop on people that look exactly like us, might be too politically, inviolable. But if they're just yellows, those yellow people. So those yellow.
But I think what supports, I think my argument, Jeffrey and Ryan, at least in part, supported by the fact that during World War II, well, we put concentration camps for Japanese Americans, German Americans, no. Italian Americans, no. Right. The whites, we didn't have concentration camps. Only for the Japanese Americans, we did that. Now, I'm not saying that's conclusive, but I mean, come on, let's be real here.
Right. I think that's very obvious. I mean, look, objectively speaking, you can't know their intent, but anybody can piece together. That's very clear, Bruce. That's a good point to make.
Yeah. So I think these are important, and I want to underscore, despite what I believe are horrible defects, I still think the United States has been the best that we've had in the history of the world. More liberty. And the reason why I criticize, because I want to keep it that way. The criticism isn't to denounce it and make feel bad, but you got to understand, in order to go forward, how you can make a correction. I'm not going to leave. If I have to take the hemlock, I'll have to take the hemlock, like Socrates. But the country has given me this opportunity to speak as I am right now. And that's what and I want to underscore again, I've tried to impeach presidents for like 50 years. And the purpose isn't to belittle for the sake of belittling. The purpose is, you got to understand, how can we make this better? And you can't make it better until you see that a problem exists and understand its, the underlying dynamics. And hey, maybe why don't we try X? Why don't we try Y? Why don't we try Z? But despite all of the flaws, I look around the whole world from the beginning of time and I say to myself, Bruce, yeah, the United States got defects. Every place else was even worse. And the uniqueness of the United States in announcing in its birth certificate, everybody in the world has unalienable rights for which they've been endowed by their creator, and no one can take them away. And when he made that philosophical statement, there weren't any limits. It applied to everyone, even if there was some hypocrisy in how it was implemented. But even to establish the ideal was stunning. It was the greatest advance in the history of civilization. We don't have kings. We don't have queens. We don't have dukes. We don't have superior, inferior. We're all the same with our unalienable rights. And that's what we have to struggle to preserve.
Can I add to that from so I think most people know I'm very much an agorist in this conversation, right? Like I don't believe government should exist in the world that we might be able to build. I know people don't disagree with that. Just to make the statement, that's where I believe is possible. But that being said, to accentuate Bruce's point, I can also understand that if forced to live in a state of society, which is just one with a government control, I believe what we see in this country, the Constitution itself, is, in my experience, my view, the best thing I've ever seen in an effort within a state of society to actually have a functional check balance system where people can have some influence on their government. And so like the point is, if we're in a state of society, this is, again, I agree, the best thing in history that we've seen in this context. I'm sure people might disagree with that. I'm just pointing out to say that I do think there's worth having a conversation of what the world might look like with those same ideals without even government, if that's possible. But not even getting to that, I want to just really back up what Bruce is saying. I mean, there's really nothing like, and really, I would point out too, that in the beginning, there's nothing like it. Where we are today, I think we all agree that we've lost that, we've drifted away from that. And I think that's kind of the main point of the conversation.
Yeah. And we want to get back to that point. We want to get back there. Yeah.
I want to provide another type of context to Bruce's point and extrapolate to a point I want to make. I think that, basically post-World War II, the world kind of accepted, during the Cold War period, that there would be, the allies and the enemies, okay? And the allies kind of consented that this would be an American-dominated world. So when we take a look at the fact that when you have a now president that says, these countries have all taken us as suckers for all this period of time, that's just bullshit. Okay. If we think about what we've gotten in return, okay, John Connolly, when we abandoned the dollar, okay, when we abandoned the dollar linkage to gold, I mean, when the gold and dollar were tethered, and the dollar had to preserve the purchasing power of gold. If not, everybody can say to the U.S., "Here, my dollars. I want the gold." So, and Nixon stopped that, and Connolly then famously said, or infamously said, it's our money, but it's your problem. Okay. So one is we globalize people with the problem of now forcing them to hold dollars. Okay. So that's made it's cheaper for us to finance our government. So we've asked the whole world to finance our spending, to finance our deficit, but we don't think that's a benefit to us. The fact is that we can now spend more because we basically coerce the world through our military. And how do we do it? Okay. Do you think we allow Germans to have troops in the United States, the French to have troops in the United States, the UK to have troops in the United States? Okay. So no, we monopolize all the organizations. NATO, we really control NATO. Okay. So the whole point was we wanted to exercise control over the world. Okay. And the country said, okay, we'll let you control the world, but we need a little something in return in order for you to give control. We want access to your markets. We got to rebuild our economies. We were the ones who suffered all the damage here. You had Hawaii bombed, when Pearl Harbor bombed. We had a whole infrastructure in all our countries destroyed, So when we did a bargain at the end of the world, we did a good faith bargain, okay? We're going to be the police of the world, okay? We'll take a little bit of money from you. You have to contribute, but we really don't want you to have armies. We want you under our thumb all the time, okay? That was the deal. And if you accept that, we promise to be a benevolent parent, okay? We're going to give you some nice things along the way, but you understand our troops will be wherever we want those troops to be. And they're our troops. They answer to us under our control, okay? People think that that's like nothing. Okay, we've basically told most of the countries, surrender your sovereignty to us. Okay, we'll let your people decide certain things on their own, but ultimately the security of your country we're responsible for. So you behave well. Okay, so don't fall out of line. You answer to us. So basically, the post-World War regime has basically been a regime, where the world has accepted U.S. dominance, and in return, the U.S. has been somewhat generous with other countries in return that nobody would challenge U.S. dominance. That's the trade-off. That's what we got in return. We got in return to put our troops everywhere in the world uniquely, Okay, something we don't give any other country the right to do to us. Why don't we talk about that? Why doesn't Europe say trade talks? I want as many troops in the United States as you have, as you have in all over Europe. Okay, and then what do we have them do? We have them buy the weapons we produce. Okay,
Right.
so they can help subsidize our military state as they go out and say, gee, you know what? We have all these defense contractors. We got to make these defense contractors a lot of money. So we want to make sure they're using American weapons, that they need American replacement parts, okay, so that they're completely dependent upon us. And they've accepted to saying, okay, if you're going to be benevolent to us, if you are good guys, we're willing to do this trade. We understand we have a social contract here. We understand what we're giving up to you, okay, and what we're getting in return. So we did not want a world where the UK built its own army again, and France built its own army again, and Germany built its own army again, and that they could each fly solo. No, we wanted to give them, the fact is, when it comes to issues of use of military force, you come to us for permission, and basically most of the stuff that you use for weapons, you get from us, okay? So we can shut you down anytime we want. Okay.
I want to interject there because this is very important what you're saying, Jeffrey, because it shows and underscores NATO was created not because it was at all useful to protect the United States. The United States was the leader of creating NATO because we wanted to control and project and use NATO as a perimeter against the Soviet Union. It had nothing to do with our safety at all. Nothing. We were there. No, we're not fighting on our soil. We got 800 foreign military bases. But that was the creating, and NATO, remember, was the first time in the history of the United States of America that we ever signed a defense treaty. After 150 years, we had not a single defense treaty. You could, on an ad hoc basis, have an alliance for, temporarily, the first time ever. And it underscores, Jeffrey, what's saying, so that we could control the world. I don't want to control the world. I want to celebrate liberty at home. The world is some abstraction. I want to celebrate the United States and liberty as being our glory. The whole thing, NATO was a disaster in my judgment from the beginning. And even the claim that, NATO was to protect democracies, it was a fraud. You know who was an original member of NATO? Portugal. That was run by a dictator, right. A complete dictator. But we wanted the Azores Islands, so an Azores Island was worth a dictatorship. Anyway, it began the United States down a path of lies and lies and lies to decide that we would rather control the world than to celebrate liberty and our individual citizens at home.
And after 9/11,
trade-off. I don't want that. I don't care about controlling the world. I want to make sure we have invincible self-defense, but otherwise the world's got to take care of itself. We need to take care of our liberty, our rule of law. The influence we have is the influence of example. If another country's got to do something different, well, that's up to them. Just leave us alone. And unfortunately, we didn't take that route. And NATO was the first step. And, it's gone from, a handful of countries to now it's got 32, 33 countries of no use to the security of the United States at all. Does anyone on this program or the United States think that North Macedonia is a national security issue, or Montenegro for the United States? They're part of NATO. It's ridiculous.
The way to post 9/11, remember, I correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's Article 5, I forget which one it is, but when they created essentially the world military under we want attack one, attack all. That's the only time that's happened, and ultimately, it's flirted around Ukraine, but ultimately has created this thing that never went away on top of that. So I think that's the way that was really, I think, the implementation of it. One anomaly, back to the point about U.S. troops, or rather troops inside the United States, is Israel. Not only do they have exercises in Alaska and other places on U.S. soil, what's interesting, and I didn't even know this until very recently, there's U.S. legislation on the books that says that IDF troops are treated as the same as U.S. troops. I find that insane. It's easy to look up. And I think that's the one anomaly, and I just think that speaks to a lot of things we're talking about today. So I just want to include that.
Yeah. Well, Article 5 has been totally manipulated. I've studied the treaty. You have to look at Article 11 of NATO. NATO says that we will implement and respond under Article 5, attack on one is attack on all, according to the constitutional processes of the signatory nations. And so that means that we don't respond unless Congress declares war, right? We can do economic sanctions if Congress has delegated that. That's in Article 11. In fact, Dean Acheson, when he testified for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about NATO, specifically said, of course, under Article 5, we're not automatically at war if a NATO member is attacked, because only Congress can declare war. That's totally lost picture. No one actually believes that. I've written probably 100 letters to the newspapers, New York Times and Washington Post, mostly saying, why are you wrongly reporting that under Article 5, we're automatically at war if Putin invades Poland? It doesn't. It says Congress decides how to respond. They won't print them because they're also in the empire bubble. They don't want to make it seem as though, well, the president can't respond unilaterally. Congress is too slow. And it's another example, I believe, of how words become deformed by prevailing orthodoxies and overpower. That Article 5 has now been metamorphosed into limitless presidential power to go to war if a NATO member is attacked, from no, Congress will decide. And we know Congress has declared war in only 5 conflicts in 230 some years. Now it migrates over to the president. No change in the language, just the culture said, okay, the president can do whatever he wants. Similarly, with regard to the general belief that the president can use nuclear weapons against any adversary that he wants to. No, he can't use nuclear weapons. Only Congress can authorize, the use of nuclear weapons in time of war. Even Congress has been misled. Like they introduced bills that say the president cannot use nuclear weapons to start a war unless Congress declares war. Yeah, that's been the rule for 236 years.
Doesn't that drive you
Why
crazy?
are we introducing a bill? It shows how deformed their brains are. And it goes back to the larger point that I oftentimes repeat. We suffer from an epidemic of constitutional illiteracy. People do not understand and read the background and purpose and spirit of each provision in the Constitution and the amendments. Totally illiterate on that score. And we have members of Congress on the right and on the left. They think we have different chambers of government. They don't even know we have 3 branches. I said, what's going on here? We can't have a Constitution that works if the culture doesn't even know what it means. And anyone can stand up and say it means whatever I want it to mean. And unfortunately, that's basically where we are today.
Can I ask you something, Bruce? This just jumped into my head with what you said. If there's legislation, and this happens often, as you know, it drives me crazy when, there's legislation put forward for something that is already in existence. It's frustrating when they do that. Now, this the precedent is the real point. Does that change the reality of the law when, not the understanding then shifts because people then subconsciously, I guess, think that it's not the thing since they're trying to make it the thing. But does that change anything legally that they reintroduce legislation for something that's not that's already in existence? Does that change the legal reality of that at all?
Well, I mean, it does to this extent. In a strictly legal sense, it doesn't. But it means it gives by negative implication, without the legislation, this power would exist. But it doesn't make any sense. Do we need a legislation that says government shouldn't violate free speech? Right. It's in the First Amendment. Why do you need a statute that says something that's plain and clear? Why do you need, when the Constitution is clear, only Congress can take us from peace to war? Do you need a statute that says, no, that really isn't true, and the president, but he can't take us to war if he uses nuclear weapons? He can't take us to war under any means. But that's just an example of the kind of bills that get introduced and their eyes glaze over because they don't understand anything. And listen, and they have a responsibility. If you're going to take an oath, which is required under Article 6 of the Constitution, to support and defend our birth certificate, you have an obligation to read it and understand what you're swearing to. Mm-hmm. You can't remain ignorant, and yet they all do. And there's no peer pressure because they're all in peri delicto. They don't feel embarrassed. They're not ostracized when they say, I really have no clue, what this means, other than but we can always give it to the president. That's the fallback position of Congress. Okay, we don't have it. The fallback, the president can have it. Take it off our plate. We don't want to do it anymore. I said, no, you can't do that. Legislative power is entrusted to the Congress of the United States. It's called Article 1, Section 1. It's very clear. You can't give away that power. Just like can you imagine the Supreme Court saying, yeah, we want longer vacations. We'll let the president decide this term's docket.
That's a good overlap. I'm going to make that point.
Oh, wow.
Crazy.
Yeah, I think I got a couple of points I'd like to make. One with respect to, again, my point about, hegemony on our part. Trump understands the value of dollar hegemony because he's threatened countries that would want to move away from using the dollar as a reserve currency of the world. So again, going back to it, how valuable is it that the whole world, we're screwing the world by forcing the world on a dollar standard? Okay, so we don't look at the things we do for the rest of the world that have extreme benefit to us, and then we walk around. And going back, government debases. And I want to kind of like make a point reference to what Bruce said earlier. The type of language that the government people use, Democrats or Republicans, if they were in the private sector using those same type of words to describe their business activities, they'd be all in jail for fraud, or paying huge fines and fired from their jobs for committing fraud. Okay, so in the political sphere, you can use language in a way that in the private sphere would be considered fraud. Okay, so they're fraudsters. Okay, only what applies to committing fraud doesn't apply to them. So they have immunity from actually speaking fraudulent things. Okay, ways that we can't get away with in the private sector, because we tried to represent things the way they do. Okay, we'd have people easily have standing to sue us, and there'd be really bad consequences to us. Instead, we have almost no standing to do anything to them, and they can get away with it because a lot of the things they say they know are not true. Okay, they know they're bullshit. They know they're abuse. As I say, a business to be successful, you have to create value. Okay, most of what government does is a debasement. They debase language. They debase our rule of law. They debase the Constitution. They debase our money. All the government does is debase, 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 and debase. Okay, and that's all they do. And this abuse of language, is horrible. And it's just so divisive. And why is it so divisive? At least in a business, to the extent that if a business person uses language that might be inappropriate, one is it's easy to have standing and go after them. The second thing is the business has no coercive capacity whatsoever. Okay, the business can't force you to do anything. Okay, no business can put you in jail or do anything. Okay, they have no power over you. Okay, the government, while doing this, has a unique power over people. Which is why we have all these constitutional protections. Is that we want to make sure that government, whatever government does, okay, its primary focus, its primary purpose is to promote justice and liberty and preserve our liberty, not the government's liberty, our liberty. Okay, our liberty. So that's its objective function. Everything it does has got to be to promote justice and to preserve our liberty. That's everything they do. Every act has only got to be viewed in that context. If they're not doing it in that way, then they're acting in violation of what the spirit of the Constitution says, of what the objective of that document is. They're at war with the objective function of the Constitution. So, and like Ryan, I'm an anarchist. I don't believe in government, but to the extent that we have a government, I think Ben Franklin's statement at the Constitutional Convention, is an accurate statement. He said, we had a whole bunch of guys here in this room. This is not a perfect document, okay, but the work done by this group of people at this moment in history and the effort they put into this document is an amazing thing. Okay, so Ben Franklin never said it's perfect. Ben Franklin knew it wasn't perfect because he went out to the room. He went out of the room and then told people, it's a republic if you can keep it. Okay. Right. So he knew the document was imperfect. Who's responsible for perfecting that document? We, the people, are responsible for perfecting that document. So instead of we, the people, perfecting the document and its objective function, okay, we've destroyed it. Okay. That's what we've done. That's what we, the people, have done. Okay. We've destroyed the document because we want to live in a state of tyranny where we control it, where our guy, our person controls it. Okay. The American people don't really believe in capitalism. They don't believe in freedom. Okay. And God, American people believe I want to be the hegemon. Okay. I want the person the woman, whomever, the person to be who agrees with me. Okay. And I want to battle for control, absolute control rights over government. I want my party to control everything because I don't ever want to have to negotiate with anyone. Okay. I just want, and I don't want people impeding things to get what I want. I want instant gratification. That's our society. Okay. I want instant gratification. If there's a stalemate, that's horrible. What do we got to do to eliminate the stalemate? It's not about how do we make the consensus process better. It's how do we have an easier way of getting what we want, and basically describing the other half of the population. We got to remember again, whatever words, again, Trump abuses languages, worse than almost any person I've ever met in my life. Maybe worse than any person I've ever met in my life. Landslide. Okay, let's get this straight. Trump got a little over 49% of the popular vote. Okay. Harris got almost 49% of the popular vote. Okay. So what kind of difference it is? We're a split country, no landslide. Okay. You can sit and talk about counties, and he got most counties. Okay. What counts in the United States? People or counties? Okay. Oh, do we give counties more rights than we give people? Is that what the Constitution's about? We give counties these rights. Who cares about the people? The inalienable rights don't attribute to the people. They go to the county. Okay. I mean, this is logic. It's just stupid. Really. It's just people willing to say any piece of bullshit to get what they want. They don't give a shit about saying the truth. They don't want to think logically about anything. It's any just piece of bullshit that people can say to get what they want, to have their instant gratification. That's the American public today. Half the country voted for Trump. About half the country voted against Trump. We're
half the voters.
No, and talk about it, Jeffrey, there needs to be a comparative out there. For example, we were there around in 1972. President Nixon won over 60% of the popular vote in 1972, and he was basically driven from office under an impeachment cloud less than 2 years later. His defense, I won the election with 60%. There's no defense. You can't campaign on a platform of violating the Constitution and committing impeachable offenses. But I think more important in my mind is that we need a culture that has everybody awaken every day and remind themselves, I could be wrong. Maybe I don't have a monopoly of truth. I need to listen to alternate viewpoints. And that's humility. That's critical thinking. There may be other ways to look at this. In some sense, we're all kind of egotists in the fact that we look on events and absorb them based upon our personal experience. But we need to be we have to develop, critical thinking of our own viewpoints as well. That diminishes the fanaticism and the craziness out there. But that doesn't. It's like people are, even the youngsters at age 20. I'm infallible. At age 20, you're infallible. No, first of all, no one's infallible. Everybody knows that the wisest people make errors all the time. Isaac Newton made lots of errors before he discovered the laws of motion. We're basically raising a brainless, fanatical society that doesn't recognize indeterminacy, nuance, how things are oftentimes very blurry. I say gray rather than prime colors. And that's what causes the antagonism, the bitterness. Why do you need this? Remind yourself, you could be wrong. And you have to entertain other viewpoints. You may not accept them, but you need to have reasons for not entertaining them, not just uttering an ad hominem attack on it. We'll listen to reason. That's why God's given us, a cerebrum is to look and deliberate. That has to be bred into the culture. It should be in the home. It should be in the schools. It should be in churches and synagogues. Instead, we have this fanaticism. You don't need to think. You just grab onto an idea, and if somebody disagrees, they must be horrible and you must be right.
Right.
I mean, really.
Everywhere.
Yeah, everywhere. We would have made no progress at all. That in a sense, that's the gift that we have of Socrates. He took the hemlock to emancipate the mind, to the ability to think and ask questions. I may be wrong. He knew what he didn't know and knew what he had to ask. And we're way back before Socrates now. It's like, no, you can't. You don't ask questions. You just spout dogmas, and that's the beginning and end of the thought process. We're not going to survive that way. All this program, I can guarantee you, given the technological proficiency we're obtaining, to kill ourselves very fast, we are going to become an extinct species. They call it omnicide. It's going to happen. It's a matter of time if we don't develop some ethical and moral foundations and understand our own deficiencies and the need for safeguards and guardrails against our own stupidity and folly. We think, oh, it can't happen. You look from the beginning of time, our period on this earth is like the blink of an eye. Look at the trillions or the millions of years, that the earth has existed. We're here. So we think, oh, it's not going to happen in our lifetime, so it must be significant. Our lifetimes are nothing in the scheme of things where time is infinite. Right? Oh, it can't happen that we'll have omnicide. Why do you say that? It can happen. And in my judgment, if we don't have a course correction and try to get back, to the celebration of liberty, the march of the mind, I could be wrong, celebrating, individuals marching to their own drummers, the greatness, not controlling other people, matter of time.
Yeah, I think we all recognize here, especially that there's a very clear problem, But I think regardless of the nuance around that conversation, I think it's also worth considering that the government or just power structures have an interest right now more than ever in fanning those flames and accentuating that problem. Because right now, what we're seeing is this weird floating of this whole, like we've mentioned, like the Machiavellian mindset, this whole Curtis Yarvin philosophy of Mark Andreessen, Thiel, and Karp, and all this kind of like, well, yes. That's how it always works because people always want that. They always want segregation. They always want, and they're using that to argue that what we need is the good elitists to fight back the bad elitists. And that's like literally what's being discussed. And that is not just floating into, but it already emerged through the Trump administration. And I argue just our government, to be quite frank. And I think that is worth considering. Not that we don't have a problem, that we all agree that needs to be addressed. Bruce's point and Jeffrey's points are the answer. Question yourselves. Consider that you could be wrong. Consider people's opinions. But the power structures are abusing this problem to drive in, like that they rationalizing the removal of the constitutional system and something like what we talked about before. The CEO run country. It'll fix all the problems. That's what they're pushing right now.
Yeah. And I want to say that people who don't live in Washington don't understand that by and large, the politicians, they don't want to fix anything.
Right.
They want the issues to fester so that they can get their base to turn out. They don't want to cure anything. Their interest is to keep the problem boiling forever until we all blow up. I mean, it's quite disgusting, but that is in fact what they think about in the morning. How can we find a wedge issue that will get, and how can we distort the issue to get our base angry and awakened and destroy the other side?
Right. Politicians use the same model. When the platforms like BitChute doesn't use algorithms, I'm very anti-algorithm because I don't want. I want the ledger to be an honest ledger. I want the ledger to always reflect the organic behavior of individuals freely making decisions. So, and with the preservation of some privacy. But if you take a look at the platforms that are the most successful platforms that are most used, whether it's TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, those platforms that actively use algorithms that emphasize certain content and throttle other content. Okay, years ago during the parlor part of my life, I use the term either engagement by enragement or engagement through enragement. I'm not sure the grammatically which is the one that's grammatically correct. So grammar is not a strong point of mine, but I think conceptually what's been proven is that enraging people promotes engagement. And the politicians, instinctively know that as well. The algorithms understand that way to get people to sit and keep staring at the screen and typing and stuff is when they're enraged. Okay, so the more you enrage people, the more they'll get engaged, and that's what the politicians also understand. Basically, is if you get people enraged, you'll get people engaged. That's what these talks are. When people go up and they pretend to have hearings where it's supposed to be in give and take, but ultimately it's just a monologue where someone on the panel is yelling at somebody, trying to embarrass them, trying to make them look bad. And when the people try and ask them a question, no, yes or no, I'm not letting you filibuster, because they're not really asking them. They don't really care what they have to say. They're not really there to listen to their answers. They're there to to demonstrate their outrage and then do a fundraising letter of them on a video or hope that they'll get a television appearance out of it. But basically, all they want to do is promote outrage, enragement, outragement. That's all they want. They want an enraged society. Social media platforms want people enraged. Politicians want people enraged. Okay. I want people to dialogue. I want people to think. I want people to slow down and stop for a minute, and have a conversation with the other person. I don't want people enraged. I'm sure BitChute could probably grow more if we put algorithms in there that promote people enragement, that fed people's rage, so they'd have even more enragement and have people to share their enragement with. But that's not what I want. I want people to stop, slow down, and see the content and hopefully begin to be, thoughtful about things, so that we dialogue and we create understanding. We want to de-escalate things, don't want to make things worse. We're not going to come up with constructive solutions.
I think that issue, I think Ryan and Jeffrey, it's compounded by the general media too. Mm-hmm. I mean, I got stopped to appear on programs when they call you up and you say, what's your view of this? Say, well, it's complex. It has, okay, we don't want you, right? As soon as you say it's complex, they don't want you to say that. We want gladiatorial combat, which is what they ask for. It's just got to be black and white. They want jousting, like knights at a tournament. I said, no, the world is more complex than, okay, we don't want you on. And the media feeds on that because it makes it simplistic. It's just personalities. It's not ideas. And it continues. I think it adds fuel to the decay of the culture that you were describing that we find in the politicians. I said, wait a minute, there's nothing wrong with being truthful that an issue can be very complex and can have many, many sides to it, and that you need to be deliberative about this. And you're really not going to get much progress by viewing this as the Knights of the Round Table, jousting for on one side is all truth and on the other side is all falsity.
Yeah, you're not seeing really Fox and CNN or MSNBC or Newsmax. They're not really putting real libertarians on the platform. They're not putting anarcho-capitalists on the platform. I mean, for them, the whole political discussion, as you say, is Democrats defending Democrats and attacking Republicans, Republicans defending Republicans and attacking Democrats. Yeah. So the simple model is, all we have a choice is these two choices, and everybody has to be partisan. Okay. Nobody can see someone saying I'm a neutral participant. I'm not affiliated with any real party. Okay. I don't really believe much in government, but what I like is a rational conversation where people are intellectually honest and, and they're not trying to defend their party. They're trying to defend the truth. At the end of the day, people whose ultimate desire is to defend truth, they're not on TV. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
and I think it's important to think that I don't think that the way that they present the left-right conversation represents the majority of people anymore. There's still a slide, there's still a slant, but I think right now the hyperbolic mainstream alternative media and mainstream media point at each other like that's the full conversation. And I think moment by moment, because of things like this, people are recognizing they don't fit into that model anymore. And I think that's part of the desperation of the system right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the general idea, well, you're either for us or against us. No, there are like a million intermediate ranges there. It isn't either being for or against. There are all sorts of balancing. It's not just one or two middle points. There are about 100 or 1,000 middle points, and you need to consider each one. And well, what does the best Aristotelian mean from the two extremes? And the world isn't even close to how the politicians and the media wants to try to paint it. You can.
I'm going to give what I think is the best example that I think Bruce will. When it comes to somebody who really wants to try and defend the Constitution, who's actually in Congress. Okay, Thomas Massey. Okay, Fox doesn't want to speak with him. Newsmax doesn't want to speak with him. Nor does CNN. Okay, nor does MSNBC. So here you have someone who's intellectually honest, who can criticize one party with the same ability as the other party because he has a constitutionalist perspective. So here we have the one person, really constitutionalist. Okay, and nobody wants to give him a national platform to explain his defense of a constitutionalist point of view. Instead of a democratic point of view, instead of a party loyalty point of view, we have someone who pleads fidelity to the Constitution. People can argue whether his interpretation is right or wrong, but this is a guy who says, I'm not speaking to you as a Republican. I'm not speaking to you as a Democrat. I'm speaking to you as a constitutionalist. So at the end of the day, either party that I think diverges from the Constitution, I can criticize each party with equal facility, with equal ease, because ultimately my fidelity is whatever party I run for, we're all taking the same oath of office. We all, Democrats or Republicans, we only have one oath we take. And that oath is not to our party, not to the president, but the oath is to the Constitution. So we have one person there who takes that oath seriously, and no one wants to speak to him. Okay? Really, what does that say about the media is why don't people sit back and say, Tom Massey's got a really interesting point of view. Okay. He really is defending the Constitution. Okay. But he's going to, CNN doesn't want him because he might criticize Democrats.
Yeah.
Fox and Newsmax don't want it because he's going to criticize Trump. So, and Republicans. So think about the price it pays to be intellectually honest, okay, and defend the Constitution in this country is that you got the president moving the party to try and get you out of office of your own party because you're not loyal to the president, you're loyal to the Constitution. So think about how perverse that is, okay? And then no one wants to give this person a platform where he can explain himself further. Sometimes they want to use it. Okay, Passy said this terrible thing about Trump. Let's get him on to say this terrible thing about Trump. Okay, but that's the only way they want to they would want to use him for, but not to explain really his beliefs in and simplify. He's anti-Semitic, he's anti-Israel because he doesn't believe in this. No, he believes in the Constitution. Okay, the Constitution. He believes in the words of George Washington. Could we say George Washington was an anti-Semite? I mean,
I do have to add one point though to Massey.
Foreign, because he didn't believe we should have permanent alliances with foreign countries. Did that make him anti-British, anti-French? Okay, did it make him anti the world because he didn't believe we should have permanent alliances with any country? Really, this is moronic.
Yeah. I do have to add one point about Massey, though, and I agree entirely with everything you said. And I of anybody in Congress, he's the person that I have the most hope for right now. But I hate the politics, and this is what I always see. So he just put out his own tweet saying he thinks Donald Trump is the best president in history. He posted it. And I'm going like, how could he possibly think that with what he's been saying? But that's playing politics, I think. So I just have to add that. That's what I'm so frustrated about with all of the political game. But I do agree.
Listen, I have to volunteer. I've given constitutional tutorials to Thomas Massey. He's a good student. Okay. I've been up there. But it's a balance game. But I agree with your point, Ryan. I mean, because I've urged Thomas to be even stronger on the Constitution, saying, listen, you're the only one that, and I want to be very candid. Thomas Massey is the highest IQ of Congress, hands down. He's not trained in political science. He's MIT. He's got a lot of patents, but this guy knows how to think, and he studies. He's the only one who asked me, Bruce, give me the books I should read on the French Revolution. Nobody up there has ever asked me that. Edmund Burke and others. But even with that, there are limitations there. But surely, when it comes to feeling, that his oath is more important than all his other obligations or aspirations, there isn't even a second place, to be candid. And
it is a sad statement, Bruce, of our country. Yeah. If even someone who's the best of the best has to make that comment about Trump.
Right.
It is and that's a very important point you're making, Jeffrey, because it's ultimately us on this program, our viewers, the listeners. It's up to us. Nobody's going to save the United States from ruination except us. We don't have, as citizens, I say we have the highest office in the land because ultimate sovereignty is with us. Everybody else be a servant of us. And if we don't make it happen through votes, through argument, through establishing norms, through ostracisms, to return our country to celebrating liberty, the march of the mind, the rule of law over all these ambitions to rule the world, we're going to destroy the whole country. And all those ancestors who sacrificed everything, including their lives, for unalienable rights, it would all have been in vain. I just can't do that. I can't have these people have given their lives for this liberty, have died in vain. If I got to die too, then I got to do. It's not somebody I don't cherish, taking the hemlock. But I mean, I've lived this long. I have a free mind. I begin to think these opportunities are there not by spontaneous combustion. Human beings had to make sacrifices to make this available to us. And we need a culture that returns to these values and this attitude of gratitude toward our predecessors. So to take some risk. If we did this collectively, I don't even think we need more than 3 or 4% of the population could turn this country around with that attitude. I think others would follow. But it doesn't require anything close to the death warrant signed by the 56 signatories of the Declaration of Independence. Let's do it. Let's get together. Everybody in their own circle can advance the ball. Talking to your friends, making arguments, writing, speaking, encouraging, and opposing people who are flouting the Constitution. Not because you want to destroy them, but because that's our birth certificate. That's our salvation as a people.
You're here.
I want to pivot a little bit. One is I want to recognize that someone who's been making comments has said, and I will read directly his comment. Everybody has an opinion, and it counts for nothing under techno domination. I think that's something I know I agree with. Ryan, you're shaking your head. Yes.
Yeah. I think the best term is actually techno-feudalism. That's where this is very, very much drifting into right now. And so I agree with him.
Yes. The other thing I would like to ask Bruce, and then also see if any other things either two of you would like to talk about. But I circulated, I don't know if you saw this morning, Bruce, I circulated to you the conversation between Jack Goldsmith and Bob Bauer, and they're questioning, and they think that the indictment of Comey itself might be invalidated because they think Lindsay Halligan has not been properly appointed as the
interim U.S. attorney. Yeah.
As the interim U.S. attorney. Is it about, in your opinion, is it if the White House was consulting you again in the office of legal counsel, and apparently the opinion that Goldsmith and Bauer cite was upon the interpretation of that part of the U.S. code. I think they said that interpretation was from Alito. So that basically using Alito's interpretation of the language is that she is not valid, and therefore the indictment is not valid. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it's somewhat terra incognita. An opinion by Alito. Alito was at the Justice Department. I was there. But that's the executive branch interpretation of the Vacancies Act. And I think we need a little bit of constitutional background here. And that is a U.S. attorney is a principal officer of the United States. And that means a U.S. attorney ordinarily can't serve unless they've been confirmed by the Senate. This is not, Halligan has not been confirmed by the Senate. And the Constitution says, however, that if there's a congressional recess, then the president can make appointments because you don't want to leave vacancy recesses. And so is this a valid recess appointment? Well, Congress is not in, well, I guess they're returning this week to recess. And this is not, I believe, what the president thinks is properly a recess appointment. But Congress enacted something called the Vacancies Act that enables if there's a vacancy in the U.S. Attorney's Office for a president for a period of time to appoint someone who's already been confirmed in some other position to be the U.S. Attorney. Well, she hasn't been confirmed in any position whatsoever, right? She was serving in the White House, I believe, as in some capacity as counsel. So I think it's likely, and this has also been a case, Jeffrey and Ryan, in the Southern District of New York. No, not Southern District. I think the Eastern District of New York, in District of Nevada, District of California, where they've tried to put in U.S. attorneys who have not been confirmed by judges under the Vacancy Act. And there have been very strong challenges to the legality of indictments in these cases as well, because the same theory under the Vacancy Act was used. My own view of things is that if you understand the appointments clause, there's no way, unless Congress is in recess, that a U.S. attorney can have any validity absent confirmation by the United States Senate, which hasn't happened here, and there hasn't been a recess appointment. So these are important positions, but I think equally, Jeffrey and Ryan, the indictment was 2 pages long, which is quite unusual. I think that the so-called interim U.S. attorney got the old indictment, which was rejected by the grand jury. They presented 3 counts. They voted 2 of them, and the margin was 12 to 11. Grand juries are 23, right, members. And that's unusual that you'd get indictment 12 to 11. But I think that given Mr. Trump's statements and the open knowledge that the reason for the indictment was in opposition to the considered interim U.S. attorney who was appointed by who? Trump, who said, we don't have a case.
Right.
We can't do this. This is a Trump appointee.
Lack of evidence.
A Trump appointee since January of 2025. It is so clear that this is not a decision made by the prosecutor's office, that it came from the White House, that is, and it's clearly politically motivated. Just look at the language that Trump used. If there was ever a case of selective prosecution in the history or the annals of government, I don't know what they are. And the evidence is overwhelming. I think it'll get thrown out on clearly selective prosecution because they didn't like Jim Comey's political views or whatever. We already have that reinforced by the fact that they fired his daughter as well, who is a very skilled prosecutor in New York. It goes back to an old U.S. Supreme Court case called Yickwo versus Hopkins, where the court says even if a statute, is even-handed on its face, if it's enforced in a way that's invidious and targets people for reasons ulterior, to the actual offense at issue, it's unconstitutional and violates equal protection of the laws. And I think there's no way that this indictment is going to survive.
Yeah, I agree. I unfortunately, I'm gonna have to break off here. But I wanted to ask one last thing on this, and I agree with everything you just said. And I think it's very transparent to anybody who's objective looking at this from a nonpartisan lens. That this is, he said, I think that's what you're referring to. He literally is quoted as saying, "I don't know whether it's guilty or not. Let's let the court decide. Throw it at him and let's see what happens." It's like that's, at least in my experience, I'm not an expert in this field. I don't think that's how it's supposed to go, right? It's supposed to have a case that you've made based on evidence, and it's so. I honestly think, might cut to the chase, I don't think this is even about accountability. I think it's about making it look like that's what they're doing to appease the base who wants some kind of action. I think he knows it's going to go nowhere, and I think then it will just build into more hyperbolic conversation. Because right now what you're getting from Joneses and all the people out there, they're saying that this is the first in a long run of going after Obama and Clinton and every other person they've listed, and I don't think that's going to happen.
No. If you look at the U.S. Attorney's Manual, it says that you shouldn't even indict unless you think beyond a reasonable doubt you can win your case. Okay?
There you go.
That's the U.S. Attorney's Manual for both Republicans and Democrats. And we know Ed Martin, who's now sitting over this weaponization program, he's openly and notoriously said, even if you haven't committed a crime, we're going to harass you and make you feel that you're going to be stigmatized. If there's ever a description of an abuse of the prosecutorial process, that's it in spades. And that's obviously what's going on here. We
have a president who appointed somebody to harass their political enemies, whether they can do it criminally or any other alternative, whatever lever the government has.
Yeah.
They appointed, just think about that concept. Think about the concept. I appointed somebody not to execute the law, but to figure out the people I want to target, and I'm going to go after them with every tool the government has, whether it's legal or illegal. I'm going to cause as much damage to American citizens as possible because I consider them and then a personal enemy, not an enemy of the state. Well, again, the state's me. So, when you have the attitude the state is me, anyone who's against me is against the state. Only that's not consistent. That's not the Constitution. George Washington didn't say the state is me. A king said that. Not George Washington said that.
No,
So,
King Louis the 14th. But
King
I
Louis
think
the 14th
and what
said
you
that.
said, what I think compounds the problem, Ryan and Jeffrey, is that I have a friend of mine, Harvey Silverglade, and he wrote a book called 3 Felonies a Day. That the books are so filled with vague, discretionary prohibitions that you can kind of pick anybody that you don't like,
Right.
and you can harass them with at least a plausible case against them. 3 felonies a day. And that's what makes this prosecutorial abuse so much more troublesome today than it was, in 1789, where you had 3 prohibitions on the books and they were pretty straightforward. I know no homicide, you don't steal the mail or something like that. And we see this in prime colors right now by looking at the Comey indictment. It may well be they'll get some other indictments. We know that there's already been consternation by President Trump because Letitia James has not been indicted. He wanted her indicted, and a few others on his list, Barack Obama, and they're getting angry at failure to get indictment. And I want to underscore, the U.S. attorneys who are not moving forward are Trump appointees.
Right.
They're not Biden holdovers. They're Trump appointees, but they feel I can't keep my bar license.
Right.
If I'm going to walk for a court and knowingly tell lies. And that's what I say. And I'm not trying to exonerate the prior administrations. They're all
right. None of us are. Let's be clear about that.
But this one takes it to a new level, right, for sure.
Yeah, and he's basically got a no-lose situation, Trump, because they got a Biden appointee judge. So if the charges get dismissed for whatever reason, it's just going to be, more enemies of the state. Right. And I need a 3rd and 4th term because all these enemies are here. Look at the damage the deep state is causing against me. So politically, with his base, he needed to make the indictment. And I think as Ryan pointed out, so he needed to give his base raw meat. So he accomplished that by giving his base raw meat, and then whatever the judge rules is irrelevant. If Comey's in jail, he'll celebrate coming in jail. If the judge says, I'm throwing this out, she's not properly, she's not, it's not a proper indictment because she can't sign an indictment or for any other reasons, then Trump will go back and just say, look at that deep state, and 99% of MAGA will be shaking their head in agreement with him, and getting, angrier and angrier over how corrupt is and again, active treason, domestic terrorism. I think we're moving towards the process of I don't know about the midterm elections, but we're moving towards a process of where I think Trump is setting the, going back to the things I get concerned about downside, as someone who's a speculator in life and tries to think about all the things that can go wrong. I see a lot of signs that we're moving where Trump is testing the boundaries to see whether he can invoke the Insurrection Act.
I agree.
If he could send people into Portland, call it war ravaged, I think these are each him just probing the boundaries, and as long as there's not pushback, sufficient pushback, and each boundary he pushes, I think we're moving towards, him declaring the type of language he's using. Okay, if it's successful in using this type of language, because what'll be look at what's likely to happen. He sends more troops in, to different states. More Democrats start talking about how outrageous they are. So then he says, look at the outrage. I'm trying to clean the country up. All these people now who are stopping me from cleaning the country up, are basically, this is a domestic terrorist movement, and I got to correct the inside. So all the language to me that he's using indicates to me that we're moving towards the implementation of the Insurrection Act. Okay,
I agree.
That's a big concern, that I have, because he knows these are provocative acts. Okay, and he knows his provocation causes a reaction from the other side, and he wants to provoke. So
And you frame that well, that it's usable either way, right? Like Trump will take that either way it goes, because regardless, and it's not just this one situation, it's every single thing they're setting up. That they'll be able to jump in and call. Like, I mean, we made this point last time, didn't we? Where they're saying he called me a fascist, he's trying to get me killed, and then here's Trump saying fascist 75 times. Or Stephen Miller, same thing. He's making this big case about Gavin Newsom calling him a fascist, trying to make a case that he's trying to get him killed. Here's a list. There's probably 17 different screenshots of Stephen Miller on Twitter calling people fascist. You know, I agree with you, Jeffrey. I think it's exactly where it's going.
Yeah, I agree as well. I say, and I've repeated on numerous occasions, the language has been so debased. Just a word means whatever you want it to mean for the next 10 seconds. And then you could make it mean the opposite the 10 seconds following. There's no, I say, this is the end of civilization. We can't have dialogue unless you agree on a minimum range of meanings that you can give to words. They can't mean opposites depending upon the day of the week or the hour of the clock. But that's where we are. And when people have no interest in living a life other than, if I can get away with it, I will. That's all this is about. There's no principle. There's no higher meaning. There's no values. There's no virtue. You go to the lowest common denominator, and that's exactly what the country's going to, the lowest common denominator. But it's up to us to say no. Even if we lose, somebody has to say no. Even if it's setting a mark to be picked up 100 years from now, 200 years from now, somebody has to say this is wrong. And that's what I hope we're doing on this program. Not because, we hate the enemy, but because we love the country, because we love the principles that were announced in the Declaration and the Constitution. That's why we're doing this. Because I think, to repeat, they're the loftiest ever articulated by any human being. I'm just awed by the Declaration of Independence. They had the gall to say that. There had been no other country in the history of the world that didn't have their kings and their princes and all this hierarchy and nobility or whatever. And we said, no, every man's a king and queen. No one wears a crown, right? Everybody has dignity. That's a huge, huge step forward, in the way human beings can treat each other. So
let me add one thing to that, and I do have to leave a kind of an appointment, but I think that this, I would argue, my personal opinion, but first of all, I agree with everything you said, entirely right to this point, Bruce, and both of you, by the way, with our conversation today. But I would argue that if they were around today to answer and look at what's going on and express their thoughts and maybe where the end point might eventually be, I would argue they would align more with what we're talking about in regard to no government. I think you could argue from where the world was. Even right now, I argue this all the time. With where we are in the world today, it's very difficult to sell somebody on the idea where government doesn't exist because their mind is so, locked in that. And maybe I'm wrong, but it's about trying to think about it and consider the ideas like we're talking about. I would argue the founding fathers would probably argue that this was a stepping stone in the direction of less and less and less government until possibly it's not even needed. So I just want people to think about that. That's what I believe this is. And that's why I agree, whether or not I have more of a, agorist, anarchistic mindset of the way the world could be, that we're at a point now and all agreeing that this needs to be salvaged. And I think that's very important to think about. So thank you both again for having a great conversation today.
Bruce, any response to that, or?
No, I think that's right. I think that, I'm less optimistic, or I would say Pollyannish, about with no government at all. I think you'd end up with homicides and thievery and robbery. My goal is to have government very, very limited. But I do think that, and as long as you have the checks and balances, then I'm less worried about government. The reason why, I'm terrified, and I think you and Jeffrey are today, is because we've destroyed checks and balances and separation of powers. That's what makes government so much more terrifying. Because you give limitless power to anybody, they're going to pick up a club and knock it over your head if they don't like you.
Well, I think maybe, and I don't want to. I never like to speak for someone else, for Ryan, but if I misrepresent you, Ryan, then you step in. But I think, from my point of view, is that Ryan and I each agree that this document is an incredible document with the objectives it set out. But I think it's proved one thing, is the fact is that once you establish government, to sustain a system, given the type of people that go and enter government, and you give people some power and give people monopoly over power, that ultimately, the systems of checks and balances will not be preserved or conserved. So if I think both Ryan and I might be more amenable to a limited government if we thought it was possible to keep the government limited. But ultimately, that
Right.
system ultimately requires the people to be more engaged than they are. And since the people are, ultimately any system, as Ben Franklin kind of, I think more or less seemed to have predicted, is that ultimately, this was a great start, but the people would fail the document, and we'd end up in despotism and tyranny. So if so, I think that's the skepticism both Ryan and I. Is that a fair statement, Ryan?
Yeah, absolutely.
No,
And-
but if I could, I don't know whether they call it a rebuttal, because I agree with you that if you believe that it's impossible to educate the public, to understand the importance and defend separation and checks and balances, that they're ultimately going to gravitate toward despotism, then I would agree. It's better to have no government than some, because it can always do more damage than individuals. But I do believe maybe it was a miracle in 1787 that we had, a bright shining star with all its foibles, at least with regard to separation, until Madison died in 1836. And then we had Andy Jackson and Manifest Destiny. And then it was downhill since then. It may well be that we simply cannot, given, the limited devotion of the species to what I call our cerebral rather than hormonal faculties, you can't keep that level of education at the threshold in order to have separation work. It's just going to collapse into despotism, de facto or de jure. That's still out. Maybe I'm too optimistic about the eagerness of the species to learn and to think and deliberate. And could be wrong.
I'm with you on that.
Maybe I come around to your viewpoint and say it's hopeless. You can't get people to think. They just don't want to do that. It's way, way too hard. They just want to emote.
I have a more of a positive opinion of the majority of people. I always do, and I think that there's an interest in convincing us that we're not good enough or that we can't, But I also see the stupidity. We all have our blind spots. But I'm with you on the idea that I think if given the opportunity, the humanity would surprise us.
Yeah, and I think it's the leadership that's issue.
Yeah.
And that's where I see the big failure is. The leaders there are no role models out there. In fact, the leadership compounds the problem, rather than trying to raise the standards, as what President George Washington at the Constitutional Convention let us raise the standard to which the wise and honest may repair. I mean, they're setting a standard to which every malevolent wretch, would aspire to. The shortcuts, the immorality, the stupidity, the avarice, and that kind of thing. And so when people see that the leaders get away with it, they feel, why should I have any standards? All these people in power, they get away with that. As soon as I can take a shortcut, that's what I'm going to do as well. They're supposed to be at the top of the food chain. So what?
And they project themselves as positive and altruistic and liberty and democracy. So it teaches children that that's what that looks like. Speaking of language, like you're talking about, Bruce.
Yeah. So anyway, I always like to close. Jeffrey and Ryan, say thanks for participating, in our audience there. Sit and listen. You're part of the solution, not part of the problem here. It's not going to be easy. And we always speak with humility. We always understand we can be wrong. That's why we come back and have further conversations and really elicit, your responses. That's how we think we can go forward.
Well, thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Ryan, and have a great day and a great week.
Thanks,
guys.
Liv. Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
Bye.